Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV. You're watching The Big Picture and my name is Bilal Zaidi. Our topic of discussion today, of course, is assembly polls and is this time, of course, the testing ground for reforms for the UPA government. We'll have to really look at all the equations that come about between the state as well as what the UPA is trying to do at the center. Joining me will be an entire panel of people trying to really get a sense of from all the various sides on how this entire debate will play along. For now, I'm joined by Mr. Vinod Sharma, senior journalist, political editor of Hindustan Times. Thanks a lot for joining us. We're also will be joined by some other political leaders during this show. But just getting started, just trying to get a sense of what's just now happened in New Delhi. We've had another round of reforms. Once again, talk about foreign investments coming in. This time in the pension as well as the insurance sector. You think the time is really right to talk about all these big ticket reforms?
Well, some of these reforms can be pursued outside the sphere of parliament because they are covered by the executive's jurisdiction.
Okay.
And for instance, the FDI and multi-brand retail doesn't require a ratification by parliament, although political parties are protesting sharply and they are threatening to bring a resolution on this decision of the government in the coming session of winter session of Parliament. But I think that there are two ways of looking at it. Okay. One, with regard to the repairing of the economy, because our growth rate had been progressively falling, and the foreign investment had dried up, and there was a serious threat of an increasing financial deficit and a depreciating rupee.
Okay.
And I think that there were some prompt steps required. The government has taken a calculated risk. Political parties tend to be populist during election time. But this is one election in a long, long memory where some tough decisions are being taken by the government, even as it prepares the UP and especially the Congress prepares for elections in Himachal and Gujarat, where the contest is directly between them and the principal ruling party.
Yes.
So it's a very interesting scenario, and one will have to see that whether the government will be able to sell its reforms package amidst a populist clamor for reducing petrol prices, for scrapping FDI and retail, and for sort of negating anything and everything that even causes an iota of burden on the common man. But I think that's an easier way of looking at it. Politicians, and I'm not saying for a moment that the Congress and the UPA couldn't have done it earlier, but they are trying to, at least, they were being, their image was being sullied on two fronts. One, that they were a government that was tainted, and the other that they were a government that was dysfunctional.
Okay,
now, I think at least they are addressing the charge of being dysfunctional and they are taking policy decisions. We'll have to see whether they'll be able to push, increase in FDI in the pension sector, which requires parliamentary ratification, whether or not they'll be able to do it. But I think that they have taken a calculated risk, and perhaps they're looking for some political slogans. If an election becomes, a general election becomes inevitable, that they can go to the people to say, with the slogan at least, that we are trying to do something, but we were prevented from doing it because we didn't have the numbers in Parliament.
But how does it really play out on the ground in Gujarat specifically? If you really talk about what the stakes are for the Congress party, obviously all this talk about policy paralysis over a period of time, but when you really go down to the people, to what extent can the government really convince the people?
I think the campaign in Gujarat is yet to warm up because the polling there is on the 20th of December, if I'm not wrong. And but the inferences one can draw from the speech made yesterday by the Congress President in Rajkot, Saurashtra, and earlier the unbridled attack by the Chief Minister of Gujarat on both the Congress President personally and her son Rahul Gandhi. I could, from the Congress President's speech, read that it was something crafted by a leader who had had a sorry experience of frontal attacks on the Chief Minister in the 2007 elections.
Right.
So her speech was a study in understatement, and I think that the Congress leadership will persist with it, because Mr. Modi's game plan is to become the centerpiece of the campaign and to turn the vote into for and against him, which the Congress perhaps would not like that to be happening.
All right, we'll come to that in just a little while. Also joining us in this discussion is Mr. N.R. Bhanumurthy. He's an economist, and obviously he's a member of NIPFP think tank on finances. So thanks a lot for joining us. So what is your real sense of what really has happened today in terms of reforms? Another round of reforms announced here, pension as well as insurance sectors now under the, also open to FDI in case of insurance, of course, from 26% going to 49%. How do you really see this playing out in terms of the overall picture that the government is really trying to project?
Yeah, I think the government is taking the kind of a small gap that is available for the government to really go ahead in terms of bringing in long pending reforms, which in the government view appears to be that it is going to have a long-term impact on the growth as well as on the employment generation in the Indian economy. So in a sense that after this, the state government elections are coming, and then we also know that next year we don't have much space for bringing in more reforms. So this is an opportunity which the government is trying to catch in and trying to show to the markets as well as to the international community that the government is serious about economic reforms, and also at the same time they are trying to see the growth will not be going down much further down what we have seen in the industrial output, in a sense that at least the second half of the current financial year, they are trying to see that the growth is going to be recovering so that it will have some kind of dividends in terms of politics.
Let's also go across to, in fact, we'll just try and getting more reactions on what's really happening right now. But of course, coming back to you, Mr. Sharma, the stakes, like I mentioned, are really high. But at the same time, when you really talk about, how the Congress is trying to project its image, you think the time is right for the Congress to take a risk, especially going into, say, Gujarat? Also at a time when the Gujarat Chief Minister himself is projecting himself as a development face.
Yeah, of course, as I said, that it's a risk that the government has taken, and no government is comfortable increasing the burden on the people. And people these days are very demanding. Gone are the days when they were willing to wait for the trickle-down effect. They want results in torrents. If you remember that in 2004, the two chief ministers who lost elections were the face of reforms, first generation reforms. One was Chandrababu Naidu and the other was S.M. Krishna. And both, especially Naidu later, revised his opinion on the way reforms were pursued under NDA. And this government learnt a lot from the experience of NDA. I remember at a major conference, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was asked a question that, a lot has been done by UPA 1. But why aren't you sort of blowing the trumpet? And he said that, yes, maybe it's true that part of India is smiling, but it is also true that a large part of India is not smiling.
All right.
No, the situation today hasn't changed much. One has to see what is the reaction of that large part of India which is not smiling to these economic reforms, which are in immediate terms causing a burden on them.
All right.
But in the longer term, maybe perhaps if these reforms click on the ground and they find acceptability, they may generate wealth which can be equally distributed amongst the people of this country.
All right. So, very interesting point really mentioned there. Of course, can reforms really be sold to the people of India, to the voter, as something, as an agenda to really vote for? Joining us, of course, is a BJP spokesperson, Prakash Javadekar. Thanks a lot for joining us. What do you really make of this entire talk about how, and of course, your party has been one of the, they faced the brunt of it during the Rising, India Shining campaign, of course, in 2004. Would you really say that going ahead as a party that's going on development is something that in itself wouldn't really be enough?
No, the real issue is that this government has lost credibility to such an extent that unless we see the fine print of the reforms and the proposed bills, we cannot say whether we should support it or oppose it, because with Pranab Mukherjee, he has taken into consideration, agreed to all our concerns. Our concerns in these two reforms are, as far as pension is concerned, there has to be a sovereign guarantee about the security of the pension funds and a definite guaranteed return, minimum return to the investing, because it is hard-earned labor, money of labor force. Millions of labor force are contributing into the pension funds. So nobody should be allowed to play with it. And that was agreed to. So that 26% will come into the law itself.
Okay.
That was the discussion that time. You can't change it without coming to Parliament. So that was the essence of the story. So
of course,
as far as insurance, 1 minute, as far as insurance is concerned, our concerns were, which are reflected into Finance Committee report. It was Yashwant Sinha in India regime 10 years ago who introduced for 49%. That time Congress opposed it. So first Congress has to say why they opposed that time and now why they are proposing this time, 49%. So they are changing the goalposts. Like the FDI in retail, they were opposing.
All right.
Manmohan Singh himself. So their whole motive and politics becomes suspect. So we will give our final comment only after seeing the fine print of this move. And so we were giving constructive cooperation on these two matters, but 2 years down the line, the Congress has developed the cold feet. That is also part of history.
What?
So,
Mr. Javadekar, what do you
really explain much?
Mr. Javadekar, what do you really make of the timing? Of course, the country is going into, two assembly elections there. Obviously, most of the national parties, both Congress and the BJP, gearing up for these two assembly elections. How do you really see this entire, FDI, this so-called talk of reforms really playing out, especially on the ground in Gujarat? You think your party will be able to really send out a message that all of these are just, make-believe and this will not really have any impact on the ground?
See, basically it will not have much impact on the ground, but besides that, the timing is only for converting and diverting the subject, the corruption in which the Congress government is neck-deep involved, and so they want to convert the whole discourse and divert the discourse into some other thing. See what has happened actually in LIC, in insurance FDI, only 1.5 billion in 10 years you have received. And what will happen if you make it 49%, many of the companies have already invested into convertible instruments in the company beyond 26%. So they will convert that convertible instrument into equity. So actual no new inflow immediately is coming. And so it is not a penaka. What reforms are needed are in infrastructure. Reforms are needed in port, airport, rail, road, and reforms in power sector and many other sectors of infrastructure. So that will create employment opportunities. Those pro-people reforms are the necessity of the hour. The governance reform, the transparency reform, they are not doing it right.
Let me just bring in Mr. Bhanumurthy in this. Mr. Bhanumurthy, what's your really take on to what extent will we start seeing, the impact of all these reforms, especially these last two that have really come in today, both insurance as well as pension? You think things will start, moving almost immediately when they start coming in?
No, I think these measures are really in the right direction for a particular reason that I would like to say that if at all, if you really want to see the recovery in the GDP growth, there is no other option left for us other than mobilizing the domestic savings. in that sense, any kind of financial sector reforms, whether it is in the insurance sector, it is in the pension sector, if it can really help in mobilize the resources for investment proceeds, that would definitely help in achieving the growth of whatever the anticipated growth. This is more so in the absence of the kind of foreign capital inflow that we are really seeing at. So, in that context, I would say that these measures may not be really, as Mr. Javadekar is saying, it may not be really trying to show the positive impact in the immediate future, but in the medium to long term, these reforms is expected to have at least positive impact on mobilizing the domestic savings and channel it towards investments, which definitely all of us agree that the investments are very important for the country, particularly when you have seen a substantial rise in the infrastructure deficit. If you really don't save the domestic, mobilize the domestic savings, you are not really going to realize the investment target that you have proposed in the Planning Commission at least.
All right, Mr. Manamurthy, we'll just take a quick break now and we'll come back and we'll discuss more in depth on what really happens on the ground in Gujarat, the impact of reforms during the election campaign. Welcome back to the big picture. We're discussing what impact and reforms really have on the elections in the two states, Gujarat as well as Himachal Pradesh. I have a panel of guests here with me. I'll first go across to Mr. Prakash Javadekar, and we're just trying to understand how does it really work on the ground. When we really talk about, say, a Gujarati voter, he's also supposed to be somebody who understands how economy works, somebody who understands how the markets really work. Of late, what we're really watching is that once again, perhaps, the markets are reacting well to all these reforms on the ground. You think to some extent, the voter would be really taking note of what's really happening in New Delhi?
Yes, definitely it takes little note, but Gujarati people are very convinced about what are the real reforms and what are the real developmental measures which needs to be taken. When they see Gujarat is discriminated against, and 1 lakh crore is taken away from Gujarat and only 20,000 crores is repaid to Gujarat for development, they feel injustice is being done. So they know the issues of the governance and the state election. The issue here is whether these are real reforms or not. And as per me, these are cosmetic reforms which will not bring in much. And as you are saying, savings, let us not forget that we were at the peak of 36% of savings. Now we have come down to again 28%, 27%. So this is a decline happened because of the governance failure. So we must instill the confidence in our economy and create more jobs. Unless you create jobs, you don't save. And job creation happens if you reform in the infrastructure sector, which you are not doing.
Mr. Vinod Sharma, just taking a cue from what Mr. Javadekar is trying to imply there, we understand that, on the ground, obviously, there are ways that a state government would try to reach out to the people. But at the same time, when you really talk about larger policy reforms, that's when the center needs to really take a view at the longer term. You think at this point, the government is perhaps not really taking into account what the people of Gujarat could really be expecting?
It is not. I told you that which government would like to take these measures in the run-up to elections. And I would draw Prakash Javadekkar's attention to it as well, that to some extent, this is being done to repair the image of a dysfunctional government and as to infuse life in the economy and the markets. For the past 10 years, people have not got any returns from the markets. Those who have picked up equities in the market, they have not got any returns. Today is the hope that they may get returns, and the people of Gujarat are the ones who invest heavily in the markets. And these are the people who have given some of the best industrialists to this country. So I think that it'll be wrong to suggest that this will not tell on their behavior, on their approach to reforms. Insofar as a political party, Prakash made this comment, and rightly so, that goalposts have been changed in certain cases by the Congress party. But he'd agree with me that goalposts change automatically with the change where you sit in parliament, you know. When you change palas, the goalpost also changes. And the same charge can be leveled against any political party which has migrated from the treasury benches to the opposition benches and vice versa. So I think that the key solution, the key to the problem is that there must be, and political parties must sit down together and create in this country a political culture for facing the economic challenges and also the challenges to our security. For instance, in our country today, the consensus which was traditionally there on foreign policy has broken down. There is no culture which is agreed culture to fight terrorism.
We can come
and
to
the
that.
same here on the economic front. These differences should not be allowed to linger. Of course, the responsibility primarily is of the ruling party to reach out to the opposition. But opposition too must show a sense of accommodation when broadly they agree on a particular initiative, for instance, pensions, and for instance, the insurance sector, on which I think BJP and the Congress are broadly on the same page.
Also, Mr. Javadekar, just sticking to the idea of Gujarat, there's also a view that to a large extent, somebody like Narendra Modi, who's supposed to be very pro-industry, pro-reforms, this entire talk by the BJP would come across as anti-industry, anti-reforms in a way.
No. Actually, our position is always pro-people reform. What you are doing is politicized reforms, which doesn't yield much result. In over 10 years, see, let me tell you, the UPA has 16 members in the Finance Committee. And all unanimously, after hearing and taking note of the state of affairs in the insurance sector, wherein they found that only 1.5 billion have come into the country, where they found that they have not penetrated into the rural market as they were expected to mobilize the savings, as we are saying now. So, after looking to the performance, and actually the new FDI won't bring the new FDI, but will only be converting their convertible instruments in many cases. So that is the issue which bothered the minds of all the MPs, and they unanimously recommended that it should be 26%. So why they did it? Because Congress had not thought of it. They did not give any indication to their members. They are doing this, that timing is suspect, because they just want to do certain things to divert the one discourse which country is doing.
All right, Mr. Bhanamurthy, now what do you really make of this this argument around, whether all of this would really make sense or not, at least for the time being? You think while there would be some impact of all this in the longer run, but in the immediate future, perhaps this may not really be communicated?
Well, I think any kind of reforms like this cannot be judged on the short-term kind of outcomes. And one of the points I think it's been raised by the previous speaker is that the previous reforms have not really helped in mobilizing domestic savings. That is because even after doing some kind of reforms, even now the transaction costs are very high in the financial sector, and that's one of the reasons why the sector is not really penetrating to the lower segment of the society. In that context, if you bring in more players, you might end up in bringing down the transaction cost, and so that you can actually broaden the financial access to across the all the sections of the society.
All right. So once again, just coming to you, Mr. Javadekar, what do you really think will happen from here on? There are already to a large extent it's being seen as the government really taking a very big risk. If that's the case, perhaps the BJP will have a slightly easier job in both Himachal Pradesh as well as Gujarat. You really think at this, in this entire equation, the BJP, if it's for the BJP to lose from here, and the government is anyway taking a big risk?
See, the people have made up their mind as far as this UP and Congress government is concerned, because they have seen the good governance in operation in Gujarat and Himachal, and they want to continue on that path of progress. They want to continue on the path of that transparency. They want to continue on the path of the governance excellence, and they don't want any mischief by the Congress which they are up to. And that is why in both the states we are comfortably and we will win more handsomely than the last assembly election. So there is no immediate impact as far as this is concerned. But we are not always thinking only of elections. We must also think of the country and the more interest. So the government must come out with a final real blueprint of their ideology or their commitment. But that they are not doing. They are just politicking, and that is the most unfortunate part of the story.
And just a final word from you on the fact that, of course, development continues to be the agenda, and all the other contentious issues, be it Gujarat, be it, the Maut Ka Saudagar that happened in 2007, all of these issues are going to be, behind the scenes.
You are asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, the issue is very simple. We have excelled in governance.
Okay.
And I can tell you that why you are having today the growth rate of the country, it is because of the UPA governments. The first 10 progressing at 8+ growth rate. First 10 states, 9 are India ruled states.
Okay, and just a word from you, Mr. Sharma. How do you really make of how the Congress is going to pursue this entire campaign?
I don't know. You see, Congress, what is going to hit the campaign of the Congress is the hike in petrol prices. I mean, LPG, the quota and LPG and the hike in diesel prices. And this is really a challenge for them to negate it. And they are trying to negate in Gujarat, and they will do so in Himachal as well, placing the onus on the state government to reduce VAT, to reduce local levies and all that. But, I want to make a point that, look, the state governments, Prakash Bhai, are shining in comparison with the center, largely because most state governments have their majority in the state assemblies. And the key is the majority in the state assemblies. If you are comfortably placed in the house, you can push reforms, you can formulate policy, you can enforce policy.
Right.
And so I think an emphasis beyond a point on the performance of the states, and also it's not good to say that a particular state contributes so much and gets this much in return.
All right, of course.
Because if we are living in a globalized economy, then in economy of India is also integrated. I mean, this argument doesn't cut ice.
All right, on that note, of course, we'll wrap this discussion right here. Of course, an entire campaign is about to unfold, and we'll see a lot of Congress versus BJP and all the economics as well as identity and other politics really coming about. But for the timing, of course, all eyes on both Gujarat as well as Himachal Pradesh over the next couple of months. Thanks a lot for watching.